We have all been given the miraculous gift of consciousness. But very few of us have even opened up the box it is wrapped in. We tend to take our consciousness for granted. We do not explore deeply into it and what it is capable of, because we make assumptions about that consciousness. We naively believe that those adults into whose families our bodies are born must already know all about consciousness. And if their consciousness is as superficial and boring after they have had a lifetime of exploring it, as it seems to be, then we lose interest in consciousness, just as our parents did, and had children instead of exploring consciousness. And because they had the fear of exploring into the depths of their being, they projected those unconscious impurities and unknown terrors and dreads into their children to work out for them. And thus many people come to an ashram having had their own consciousness traumatized, terrorized. And so its vibrational frequency is in a state of permanent alarm, permanent need, permanent terror, permanent paranoia, permanent distrust, permanent confusion, permanent hopelessness. And it's permanent because there is a belief in its permanence. There is a belief that these affects permeate the consciousness, and that they constitute the nature of consciousness. And therefore the traumatized being wants to become unconscious because consciousness itself has become the trauma. And so the choice is to attempt to either black out or run away from oneself or kill oneself or hurt other people in order to project the pain outward on others, or so divert one's attention with physical symptoms of suffering that the emotional suffering is occluded behind things that doctors can help you deal with and other kinds of professionals on whom you can give the responsibility for your healing, but that they cannot provide. And only when we recognize, having been traumatized, that the trauma only reaches as deep as the ego, and that the ego is only the very surface level of an infinitely deep essence that cannot be described in language, because its richness, its power, its greatness, its beauty, its vastness, its unlimited potentials have not been reached and have not been made into assets available for one's healing. Because one has become afraid of consciousness itself. One doesn't know how to use consciousness to heal those sectors of the consciousness that have been brought to a traumatized condition. And one tries to wall them off from further experience that could create more trauma. But all one does in that case is to eternalize the trauma behind the walls of the defense mechanisms, so that no healing energy can reach into those dungeons of infantile terror. And no light and no healing can reach the terrified child. And that terrified child does not recognize that it is just one tiny bubble floating on a wave within an infinite ocean of consciousness that is entirely blissful, but that it lives within one bubble of pain and will not allow that bubble to pop and give itself the realization of that bliss. No matter how many teachings and testimonials of the reality of the bliss are offered, no matter how many examples of beings who have healed and who have realized that bliss, that peace, that freedom, the traumatized and self-mummified infantile ego does not dare to take the chance to experience a new present, and remains frozen in that past, permeated by toxic affects. And when the toxicity reaches such a level that it cannot tolerate even new information, then it can only fall asleep or run away or cut itself or create some kind of self-harm to the body to divert one's attention from the pain that one has identified as being. It becomes no longer a pain that one has, but a pain that one is. And then one wants to evacuate. At the first level, one hopes one can run away geographically, and through traveling find some peace, because one will not be known or recognized as the pain one feels one is seen as. But one wanders through an empty and meaningless world, because one cannot allow oneself to receive whatever goodness would be offered in any part of any world. And in all of those attempts to run away on the phenomenal plane, one never leaves the immovable consciousness that has been frozen in its dread, in its demonic fantasy of what life is, and can never discover that that fantasy is incorrect. And so it is only when there has come a moment when one realizes one cannot run away and one cannot heal the traumatized consciousness on one's own, that the recognition that there is no alternative to surrender to that offering of love which can be given by one who has entered into consciousness so deeply that there is nothing left but the blissful, infinite self. And the purification of the soul has eliminated vibrational frequencies of desire and fear that would be perceived and encountered as dangerous by a soul who has been traumatized. And therefore, to become a healer, to have the capacity to heal those who are in that condition, one must have purified one's consciousness of all residues of fear and desire and of egoic cowardice and egoic limitation of one's horizons, which are walled off by the fear of death from the infinite eternal life and the source of blessings. And it is when one has reached that infinity and functions as a channel of that, as a medium, as a portal, then the flow of that divine love and wisdom and light in its purity will permeate through the membrane of even the thickest defense mechanisms and walls of egoic refuge from the real.